recognized for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm really glad that, at first I was a little bit unsure why we were considering both of these at the same time, but I'm really glad that we are because of some of the comments that I've heard in this debate. So first of all, a question for Mr. Raskin. How long have we been given this mechanism of home rule?
The DC Home Rule Charter was adopted in the modern period in 1973 when Congress extended it. It did exist in the 19th century and was revoked as black voting rights were taken away, and it was part of the anti-Reconstruction period.
So we have had this power since the 1970s, since 1970.
No, before that, from the very beginning, Congress has had the power. Since the Organic Act was adopted in 1801, which is when Congress accepted the cession of lands from Maryland and Virginia and created a city. What was interesting is the lands were actually given in 1790, and people in D.C. continued to vote in Maryland or Virginia so they wouldn't be disenfranchised. And some people think of it as a kind of accidental disenfranchisement.
But we're not considering whether we're eliminating home rule today.
Well, it depends on who you ask, you know? I mean, the people in D.C.
No, we're not considering,
overturning
it is
the
not
charter.
overturning home
No.
rule. So what we are doing in these two resolutions is operating under a power that we've been given, that we already have. And it is up to us to determine the appropriate use of that.
Could I just make one point about that?
Just a moment.
Yep.
So do you know how many visitors visit Washington, D.C. from around the world, around the country?
I got to be forced to guess that one, too. I would say 200 million a year.
It's not that high.
It's not that high.
But it's 19.1 million visitors on average yearly. About 270,000 of those are from other countries. So the vast majority of people visiting Washington, D.C. are our constituents from around the country. So I want to pivot just a moment to the crime part of this, the crime resolution. That would be HJ Res 26. We've gotten two letters here, Mr. Raskin, from the National Fraternal Order of Police and a letter from the D.C. Police Union asking us to support the resolution of disapproval. Does that not impact you, in your opinion, at all?
Well, for me, that's easy, because for me, it's a question of a principle of political self-determination. I'm a lot more interested in what the police unions are saying about banning semi-automatic assault weapons nationally.
Okay, I'm going to reclaim my time.
Yeah.
Mr. Comer, I want to talk about the Voting Rights Act. This is where these two things, I think, uniquely intersect. So the Local Resident Voting Rights Amendment Act makes no exception for foreign diplomats or agents voting in D.C. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Would it be fair to assume that perhaps there are more foreign diplomats here in Washington, D.C. than any other major U.S. city, given the status of our nation's capital, the presence of foreign embassies, the State Department, et cetera?
Yes, definitely Washington and New York City, I would assume, would be the top two, by far.
Is it your understanding that our diplomats serving elsewhere abroad are given the opportunity to vote in local elections representing the United States?
I haven't seen where they are, but I could be wrong on that. I've never read that they were. I would assume no.
Can you think of a single positive reason why we would want individuals who have sworn allegiance to another country, in some cases hostile countries, like Iran, China, et cetera, to have a say in any elections, local or otherwise, in the United States of America?
No, in fact, this issue comes up a lot in Kentucky. People want us to stand up to our adversaries around the world, bring our jobs back, do something about foreign adversaries stealing our technology and intellectual property. And so this is a big issue. And let me say this, no state has allowed non-citizen voting since 1926. That was something I wanted to bring out as well.
So let me just put a pin in that for just a moment and turn to the crime issue. We've heard if the citizens of Washington, D.C. don't agree with the crime policy, they can just vote them out. Okay? Mm-hmm. Unless they are foreign agents who are utilizing this mechanism in the interest of creating chaos and disorder in our capital city. Is that not correct?
That's right.
Well, I'm very concerned, particularly on the crime side. This resolution eliminates the accomplice liability for felony murder. I just did a quick check of the Washington, D.C. Unsolved homicides from 2022. There were 122 that were unsolved. Do you think that eliminating the accomplice liability for felony murder makes those, solving those cases more or less likely?
Less likely.
And do you think that if we reduce some of these penalties, it overall makes the city of Washington, D.C. more safe or less safe?
Less safe.
And the Fraternal Order Police says that more than 500 officers have left the department. Does that make Washington, D.C. more safe or less safe for our constituents visiting?
Less safe. And I think in all of our districts where I've read just about, there's a shortage of police officers. And I think what their opinion with respect to criminal policy matters.
Yes. I just want to say that I think we need to give our law enforcement officers all the tools necessary to be successful. I agree with our law enforcement that we must not embolden criminals. We must not sideline justice for any sake. Public safety is a #1 priority, should be a #1 priority of our Congress. I appreciate you bringing this resolution. I want to yield some time to my colleague, Mr. Norman. Mr. Chairman, if I can. I'll yield to Mr. Roy, Mr. Chairman.
I would only add, there was a point earlier about the GDP of Washington, D.C. being bigger than, I believe, 17 states. I think is what the gentleman from Maryland said, or something along those lines. I would only note that an enormous percentage of the GDP of the city of Washington comes from federal government and government-related expenditures and issues related to the federal government almost directly, as opposed to significant industry and so forth. And then a good portion of the GDP related to any industry that's here are related to lobbyists. I yield back.
Thank you to the witnesses. I yield back my time.
Gentleman from New York, Mr. Langworthy, is recognized for questions.
Thank you very much.